now.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, at this point, you should have solved this quadratic equation, 3x squared equals 5x plus 2, using 3 different methods: factoring, completing the square, and the quadratic formula. I have a question. Which one is your favorite method, and why? I'll let the person say next to you. Let me hear some responses. I've heard some different things. Elvira, go ahead.
The quadratic formula.
Quadratic formula. Why is that your favorite method?
Because it will always work.
Because it will always work. Who agrees with Elvira that the quadratic formula will work for any quadratic equation? So factoring won't work for every quadratic equation?
No.
Why not?
Because you
Can't always factor quadratic. Completing the square will always work?
It will, but it's really complicated.
It will, but it's really complicated. What do you mean by complicated?
Like, there's too many fractions involved sometimes, and you can get confused.
You could get confused, potentially make a mistake. I got you. Well, who else? What is your favorite method of the ones on the screen right now? John? Why quadratic formula?
It's the easiest and quickest method to get the answer.
For you, it's the easiest and the quickest method. I would think factoring would be the easiest and the quickest method.
Depends what equation.
But it depends what equation you get. What do you mean by that?
Well, like, if you get like an equation with a bunch of like fractions and stuff, I guess it's easier to go with quadratic.
And also, not every equation is. Not every quadratic is. Help my guys. Not every quadratic is factorable, right? So that's why factoring is break down. Others, my favorite method. Why? Justin?
Quadratic formula.
Why quadratic formula?
It's the most accurate method to get the answer.
It's the most accurate method to get the answer. So this isn't accurate? These answers aren't accurate? These answers aren't accurate?
Well, some equations you can't factor, and for another equation you only need two in order to get the answer with the square.
Factoring may not always work. Completing the square, the risk of messing up because there's so much involved. Quadratic formula, you know, every single time. It's easier. It's bulletproof. Every single time it will work. Anyone else? When I heard you say something about safety, what would you say?
Quadratic formula is the safest way to solve an equation.
The safest way. What do you mean by safest way?
Because it's the easiest way to get to the answer with no mistakes.
It's the easiest way to get to the answer with no mistakes. Christian?
It's like the quadratic formula because it's the best way to find the answer.
The quadratic formula is the best way to find answer. What do you mean by that?
It's easier, it works every time, it works regardless of whether the equation is perfect square.
Perfect. It works every time. It works if it'll work even if the equation is not a perfect square trinomial, if the quadratic is not factorable. Absolutely. Which one do you think, if executed, will give you confidence that the student knows how to solve a quadratic equation and their number sense is extremely strong? Of those, which one do you think is the best at what I just said? Factoring, completing the square, or quadratic formula. Maria?
Completely.
Why completing the square? What's going on in completing the square that's not happening here, that's not happening here? What are you working with? You're working with what? Fractions. Absolutely. And that's something that I think some of us in the classroom, it's obvious in your answers, you all like the quadratic formula because you're not really dealing with fractions. We want to avoid using fractions. So there's no, I just want to be very clear. The expectation for you is that you will be able to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, by completing the square, and using the quadratic formula. That's the expectation on the assessment. I'm going to ask you explicitly to use them all. If I do not ask you explicitly, it is your choice. You have 3 choices. Nigel, agree with me on that? I've got a question. What are we solving for when we solve a quadratic equation? We get x equals negative 1/3, x equals 2. What does that mean? Hands up. What does that mean? What did we just solve for? What did we just solve? What did we just solve? When? We solved for the x-intercepts. Go deeper. What do you mean by that? I'm sorry, when? Who agrees that's how our quadratic is going to look like, the graph of our quadratic? How do I know it's that way? How do I know it's not upside down? Alvira? Because what? x isn't negative. Yeah, it is. The x is negative 5. The first x, there's only one x. The x squared is what? It's positive 3. So what was the rule we learned? If the coefficient of x squared is, then the quadratic is going to face up. Tell that person next to you that statement. If the coefficient of x squared is positive, then the quadratic is facing up. Great. So what did we just solve for? The x-intercept. What does that mean? Wen just said the x-intercepts. What does that mean? Kian? The point where the graph of the quadratic crosses the x-axis. Excellent. Where is it going to cross the x-axis, Kian?
It's going to cross at 1/3 cube.
That's actually a
Negative 1/3.
negative 1/32. So it's actually is with me? Why are we setting the equation equal to 0? Why are we so concerned about that? Why do we have to set the equation equal to 0 when we're solving for x-intercepts? Tell the person next to you. Christian?
Zero, your y value.
Because 0 is your y value when you're solving for what?